For more on the global refugee issue, I spoke again to Ninette Kelley, who you just heard from there. She is the New York Office Director of United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. And I started by asking her if the migration situation in Europe is improving.
Yes, and the numbers that are now coming to Europe are far smaller, but the challenges still remain because the cooperative framework so necessary for Europe to manage refugees is simply not there yet. So that's why this subject continues to gain a lot of deserved attention, and for which we are very closely working with our European partners to try to help them resolve.
In the last couple of weeks, we've had a couple of major announcements from the United States with respect to money that they traditionally give to the Palestinian refugees, and also lowering the cap on accepting refugees into the United States down to 30,000. What do you see at this point as the impact of that, and are there other countries who can step up in light of that?
Well, the resettlement situation for us has always been one of concern. Resettlement is just one solution among many. And the problem is the number of resettlement places have always been much smaller than the need. We estimate that some 10% of all refugees are extremely vulnerable in need of resettlement, and yet we're rarely able to get 1% resettled. So our message to all countries is to please do more in terms of resettlement, open up more spaces. The United States has traditionally been far ahead of any other country in resettlement places, and so our advocacy has consistently been to also look to other countries to step forward and find more places to resettle refugees, but also to open up other possible pathways for admission, including family reunification and labor mobility schemes, these sorts of things which we think are an important sign and an important symbol of responsibility sharing, not the only one, but an important one in a world where the doors are progressively closing. Having said that, it's also important to mention that resettlement is one aspect of a country's contribution to refugees, and the United States is by far our largest donors to assistance to refugees, for which we continue to be very appreciative.
One of the conversations we've gotten into routinely on the subject of refugees and migrants and migration is the difference between a refugee and an economic migrant, and why that matters in this context. Can you talk a little bit more about that and underscore that for our viewers?
Well, I think we have to, when we're talking about migrants, there's 256 million migrants in the world today, of which, by the way, I am one of them here working as a foreigner in the United States. And it's recognized that migration brings all sorts of very positive benefits to the world. Refugees are persons who are compelled to leave their home countries because of grave threats of persecution, violence, and conflict. And the main difference is that they are unable to return home, and they need international protection in the sense of they need protection outside of their countries, for which we have an established legal regime.
Lastly, I know at the end of the year you're going to have an opportunity to adopt a global impact on refugees and the global compact for safe, orderly, and regular migration. Those are going to be considered at the end of the year. What's important for people to know about that?
Well, I think in terms of the Global Compact for Refugees, it's a watershed really for us to move our global responses in a very new direction, one that looks towards expanding the number of actors that are already providing support, for which we see some very positive examples. And let me bring it down to this. Traditionally, we've responded to refugees by providing assistance, food, shelter, healthcare, one-off. But this is to say we're faced with many protracted refugee situations in countries that are very much stretched by these. What we need is more sustainable responses. That means we need to support countries, improve education systems, improve healthcare, improve opportunities for livelihoods in a manner that benefits not just refugees, but also the communities in which they live. So we need more than humanitarian partners. We need development partners. We need private sector. We need civil society, international and national NGOs. And this global compact brings all that together with very concrete mechanisms that can be put in place from the time of admission until durable solutions are found. So it's an extremely positive and document that bodes well in terms of future refugee responses.